The NDA government has a majority, the BJP by itself doesn't. This is different from what this country has been used to over the past 10 years. How does the fact that the BJP is 30 plus short of a majority impact governance? How does this impact reform? How does this impact what the government can and cannot do? How does this impact the India growth story? To talk about this, I'm delighted to be joined on this broadcast by Ridham Desai, Managing Director at Morgan Stanley India, and one of the sharp watchers of the Indian policy scene. With us is Praveen Chakravarti, Chairperson of the Professionals of the Congress and heads the Data Analytics Unit of the Congress Party. Kanchan Gupta has worked within this government for a very long time, has a very sharp understanding of what's going on in the minds of the powers that be. And with me in the studio, my colleague Siddharth Zarabi, Managing Editor at Business Today TV. I want to go across to Ridham Desai first. Ridham, the markets were expecting a big surge on the Sensex and the NSE if the BJP had come back to power with an absolute majority. It didn't happen. The markets took a hit. Since then, they've recovered and are at all-time highs. But if we leave immediate turbulence on the side and take a longer-term view on the markets, what's your sense? Because this government doesn't have a full majority, how do you think it could impact the government's reform agenda? Ridham Desai.
Hey, thanks, Rahul. Great to be on your show. So I don't think actually it affects the economic reforms. Most of the economic reforms that this government has been pursuing over the past few years is in the domain of what I call execution, not legislative change. It may affect the political agenda where there are some law changes that may have been in the pipeline, but it doesn't affect the economic consequences. So if you look at it, there are three key things here that the government, I think, will try to do in its third term. The first is continue to pursue macro stability. And for your viewers, that should be just translated into, let's bring inflation down. More importantly, let's bring the volatility of inflation lower. And mind you, the government has been very successful on this since 2014 with a plethora of things that they have been doing. So I expect that to continue. The second thing is continue to build infrastructure, both physical and social. It's not just roads and highways, it's also about building homes, getting water to homes, getting electricity connections going, and then of course adding on. And over here, I think this third term is going to be all about railways. So I'm not surprised with the continuity in the railway ministry. I think it's quite critical because the railway has reached a point where it could be an inflection. And the share of railways in India's logistics is set to go up, which will bring down the cost of logistics. And guess what? That makes India a better destination for manufacturing. And that brings me to the third set of reforms, which is to enhance India's manufacturing sector. And if you look at this, India has been woefully unsuccessful. Since independence, the share of manufacturing in this country as a percentage of GDP has only been going down. And the government has been trying to lift it, and I think it's going to be very successful, also helped by the fact that a lot of corporations are seeking another destination away from China. So these are the three things that the government will do. None of this requires the parliament to stand up and say A. It is all down to the cabinet and the prime minister and what execution they can deliver.
Now, one of the things that we picked up from our data intelligence unit when we were tracking the results of the election is that there's rural distress visible in the voting percentages and seats that the BJP won in rural India, down substantially from the last time. And Rahul Gandhi and the Congress made all kinds of promises, 8,500 rupees, taka-tak directly into your bank accounts, apprenticeship schemes, and all manner of fiscally improving promises. This puts the government under pressure to try and do more for those at the bottom of the pyramid. This whole idea of uneven economic recovery, K-shaped growth, income inequality became a big talking point during the elections. This does put the government under more pressure to do more and to open their purse strings. How could that impact the fiscal path that the government had, where they were being very, very conservative, not spending recklessly, and even urging states to do the same? Now, states want to do more, and the government may be under pressure to do more as well.
See, Rahul, allow me to respond this with three things. Firstly, redistributing taxes does not lift people out of poverty. We've been doing that for many decades, and India's poverty rate did not change. What changes poverty is opportunity, not redistribution of cash. And that is, I think, a very big thinking process within this government, in my view. It's neither the BJP's politics, nor its philosophy, nor its policy to redistribute taxes. In fact, let me add here, if you actually let the fiscal deficit rise, what you do, through redistribution, what you do is actually create inflation pressure. Inflation hurts poor people more than anybody else. So really what I think is going to get delivered, and we already have a hint of this, because what was the first decision the cabinet made? Let's build more homes. If you can house the poor people, if you can get them electricity, if you can build the social infrastructure, get schools going, poor people will rise from their poverty. And actually, we've been quite successful in the last few years. A lot of people have exited poverty. Poverty is not resolved. We are still a very poor nation. There are still a lot of poor people. There's more work to be done. But redistribution is not the answer. That does not eradicate poverty. So there will be a response. It will be in the form of social infrastructure, a point that I made at the outset.
Siddharth Zarabi has a question for you. Siddharth.
Rhythm, you mentioned houses, and just for everyone to recall, the budget had spoken about 20 million. They actually did 30 million. So a 50% increase straight away. But I want you to tell our viewers, what do you think of the finance minister's remark in the interim budget where she said, and I quote, that the government will take up next generation reforms, build a consensus with the states and stakeholders for effective implementation. She perhaps was almost talking about coalition politics, but Rhythm, what could those next generation reforms be?
So there could be a slew of them, Siddharth. Let me give a few examples. The first one is, say, GST. So, then GST, which when it was implemented in 2017, had a bunch of compromises around it, because we were asking the states to give up their power to tax goods and services forever. I kid around with American investors about this. Try asking 50 states in the United States of America to give up their power to tax, and you will not get a consensus for 100 years. So there were compromises made. Now that GST has to, get further and further refined. So that's where you need the states to agree. Another area, land reform. Now, it wasn't for lack of effort on the part of the Prime Minister that we didn't get the land reform bill in 2015. He tried, but the consensus was missing. So that's another area. I can tell you a third area where I'm hopeful but not expecting it to happen is farm. Now, if you ask me, one of the biggest risks in India, and it dovetails with the question that Rahul asked about poverty, is the state of farmers. We have 200 million farmers, which is 40% of India's workforce, and they produce all of 15% of India's output. They are 1/5 as productive as the rest of the nation. Farm is a quintessential state subject. The Prime Minister tried and had a very, very good set of reforms. It could have been that industrial revolution moment in India's farm sector, but unfortunately, the consensus was missing. So these are the next generation reforms that require the states to cooperate with the government. And if that happens, then, all my estimates about India's growth will be out of the window. We will go much higher than what I'm thinking right now. Even my optimistic forecast will prove to be conservative.
So what is your optimistic forecast? And what's your conservative forecast at the moment? How soon will India likely be the world's third largest economy?
See, that we have already printed in 2022. That I think is a likely event in fiscal 28, either 27 or 28, because in part it depends on what Japan does. So it's not an absolute thing for India. So depending on where Japan ends up, we'll be in 27 or 28. So I think the Prime Minister made that promise in the Parliament, and he will be able to deliver on that. So we will get there. Really, that's not the debate here, Rahul. The question is, when can we get our per capita income to $5,000? We're currently at about $2.5. And at $5,000, this whole country will feel a whole lot richer. That very section of the society that you referred to, where there is distress, will be out of distress. And I think that is something that could happen towards the end of this 5-year term in an optimistic scenario. And in a base case scenario, maybe by 2031. So that is where I think, some risks need to be taken. You see, the government and the Prime Minister especially, as I have termed him even on your show last year, I think it was, when I called him an inflation hawk. To be an inflation hawk means you have to be conservative with growth. Because if you let growth run away and the country is not ready for it, then you trigger inflation problems. And then poverty actually increases, does not decrease. So to deliver that mix, which in economic parlance we call Goldilocks, which is high growth and low inflation, is what this government will have to do. And to do that, I think they have to undertake a lot of supply side reforms. For example, you've got to build the judiciary. You have to build the bureaucracy. You have to build more education, more healthcare. These are the supply side things that are holding India back. And I think that could form a very critical part of the government's so-called reform agenda for the next 5 years.
Very fascinating insights, these from Ridham Desai. I'd like you to stay with us for a while. As I said, this is not a debate that you typically see on television, so it's not a tu-tu-meme. We've got different people who come from different points of view, and you've spoken about the need to take risk and the kind of reforms that are required, land, GST, farm. But there's also the opposition to deal with, and Praveen Chakravarti represents the Congress party. Mr. Chakravarti, last time round, the government had a full majority of its own. They could muster a two-thirds majority and push through the bills that they wanted. And what the opposition thought of it mattered little. Now, in the changed circumstances, the opposition will have a stronger voice. And the point that Ridham Desai at Morgan Stanley is making, we're on the right path. We're being hawkish on inflation. And that if we continue and do some of these economic reforms he mentioned, by 2031, we'd be able to lift the per capita income of our country, and that is the way to go. It's not about doles, it's not about freebies, it's not about handouts. Your party is advocating a completely different approach. You know, Rahul Gandhi in the campaign says just give 8,500 rupees. That's not leading to anything productive getting created. You're not really building manufacturing. It's more focused on freebies. Ridham Desai argues that go down the road that you're going and prosperity will start trickling down to those who are distressed at the moment. Praveen Chakravarti, your thoughts on this?
Yes. So what, first thing I think, since we are starting with politics, let's first understand, or at least in our view, in my view, the big message from the election to the BJP was this: thank you for the temple, where is my job? This is the overriding message that we have to take away from the election. And it becomes imperative and important that we address this. We all have to first, I don't think it's a secret that we have a jobs emergency, a jobs crisis in this country. We have to stop this GDP charade. I'm not saying GDP is not important, but we have to just stop going by headline GDP growth and third largest and fastest growing and all of that. It is very, very, very clear. Headline GDP is not translating into jobs, livelihoods, incomes for people. And that is very crystal clear from data. And there is also a clear political lesson that we've learned. So now what I'm going to argue now is, Rahul, we must actually, because it's a jobs emergency in this country, like a COVID emergency, we must actually come together as a nation. I would argue and call for a bipartisan consensus to solve this problem, the jobs problem. And I know the Prime Minister has retained a lot of his ministers, but I would urge him to actually at least change his Council of Economic Advisors and at least get some people who are focused more on the labor market and on the jobs issue.
How would you solve the job? Every government deals with the job crisis. How would you solve it?
Exactly, which is why I think you chose to read some sections of the manifesto. As member of the manifesto committee who had an active role in writing it, let me point out the ideas in the Congress Party's manifesto. The first, on page 11, right to apprenticeship. The right to apprenticeship idea was formulated. I had personally consulted with experts from across the world and in India, labor market experts, industry, youth, students, and we formulated something called a right to apprenticeship. Now, whether you want to call it a right, don't want to call it a right, that is fine, whatever the government wants to do. But let's pick up on the idea of apprenticeship for jobs. Second, we said, let us, on page 30.
No, but even if you get an apprenticeship, how does it lead to a job? You could get the apprenticeship and the company could tell you at the end of it, okay, thank you very much. It was good having you for a year, whatever period that apprenticeship is. How does right to apprenticeship by itself create more jobs, Praveen?
Okay, Rahul, you must read study the European, the German model, where apprenticeship leads to jobs. Apprenticeship today trains people for the job market. It skills them. It gives them dignity, gives them on-the-job training. It prepares them for the workforce. Okay? So that's the way lots of nations have moved forward. So that is why we believe that the apprenticeship is an idea whose time has come for India. The next, we have a very clear idea in the manifesto called the employment-linked incentives. You may choose to focus only on the 500 rupees and the others, but these are also part of the manifesto that I'm talking about. Just as the government has production-linked incentives.
No, but can I pause you for a second on apprenticeship, Raveen? Let's imagine you do the apprenticeship and indeed you're upskilled and you learn enough. The company has to be in investment mode to be expanding its capacity to want to take in more people, which is the point that the likes of Kanchan Gupta and Rhythm Desai would make, that the companies have to be investing in manufacturing or whatever it is that they do, wanting to expand. That's when you can take in more people, or you could have this right to apprenticeship, dande ki zor pe. You get people trained, but there is no absorption capacity unless companies are in expansion mode.
Exactly. See, what is happening today is, I mean, these are economists, including, in the JP Morgan economists have all said, basically we have a capital labor imbalance problem, right? So when this government goes out and woos semiconductor plants like Micron and pays it $2 billion to create semiconductor factories, which is taxpayer money, it creates 5,000 jobs. Put that in labor intensive. I am not saying semiconductors is not important. It's very important. But let me tell you, $2 billion is not a big deal for Micron. Put that in labor intensive sectors. So I will point out to ideas on how to create absorption capacity for apprentices.
No, which sectors would you put it in? Okay, let's imagine that you got in a company wanting to invest $2 billion. What sector would you want us to invest in, given the fact that the Indian economy is relatively less competitive than the Chinese economy or less competitive than Vietnam in trying to attract investment? How would it be competitive internationally when it comes to exports?
Exactly, I'm coming to that. The labor-intensive export sectors are textiles, apparel, leather, and there is a particular idea in the manifesto, which is strategic mining for strategic minerals, critical minerals. Of course, ecologically sensitive, but that is something that India can actually play a big role. And guess what? And we have said very categorically in the manifesto, we want to double the share of mining as from 2 to 4% of GDP. And what does mining do? What does strategic mining do? It creates jobs for unskilled. It's the only sector that takes jobs to people, not people to jobs. And it's unskilled. It's very labor intensive. So there are sectors where you put money and create jobs. And that is why we think the propensity to get carried away by headline GDP and all this drama and tamasha about world's fastest growing. I am not for a moment saying growth is not important. Growth is important. But whose GDP is this? That is the question I would like.
Siddharth Zarabi has a question for you. Siddharth.
Frankly, more than a question, a comment, because Mr. Chakravarti, what is not clear is who is going to take those apprentices. You mentioned textiles. The world is now moving towards more technology-intensive textiles. There is a technology upgradation fund scheme that's been there for 20 years plus. I think perhaps more serious thought is needed. But Rahul, may I just add one point where the issue of job creation is very fundamental. Nirmala Sitharaman in 2019 as finance minister gave a very big tax break to corporate India, both for existing companies and for new companies. I think the larger question that we need answers from this government and hopefully the budget is, have those companies who have benefited from those tax cuts stepped up, both from a point of view of investing, that is private capital expenditure, and creating jobs? Because the logic behind that tax cut was that these companies would go out and invest. Private sector capex had taken a big hit during the second part of the UPA government because of all the scams and scandals. The first 5 years of Modi government were spent in clearing that up. The second Modi government gave that big tax break, but it somehow doesn't seem to have delivered results. And frankly, that's a question that I would like to pose to Kanchan, that would the government now in 2024, as it approaches...
No, but what can they do it? You can take the horse to the water well, then the horse has to drink the water. Now they've done what it
Well,
could.
maybe
despite-
ask the question that...
Siddharth, we lost 2.5 years to COVID.
Well,
Unfortunately, what happened was that the tax breaks came in 19, and what you're saying is exactly what the thinking of the government was. In September 2019, and then in February, March 2020, we went into COVID, and it took a while for us to come out of COVID. And I think that reflects in the job scenario as well.
That's why, Rhythm, the question that I'm raising is it time for the government, and that's what Rahul is asking, and maybe Kanchan would like to respond. Kanchan, is it time for the government to now sort of say that, okay, we've done what we could, corporate India, a large, medium-sized, all companies, please step up?
Well, it's not only just a broad brush thing of corporate India. We have to look closely at MSMEs and SMEs. Look, I don't buy into this. I mean, it sounds very nice, this apprenticeship program. This is not a very original idea. I think in recent times, Mamata Banerjee tried this to sort of, create the idea of jobs. And she started distributing letters of appointment at special public rallies. And then it turned out that most of the letters were no good, because when people turned up at these places for apprenticeship, they were basically hole-in-the-wall operations. They were so small that they could barely sort of, honor their commitment. Or in many cases, it just turned out to be a hoax. So to say that we can start a grand apprenticeship scheme and there will be so many skilled people that there will be a demand for so many skilled jobs, it doesn't quite work like that. I mean, just to put things in perspective, 10 years of UPA rule, India witnessed plummeting jobs. I mean, it was growth without jobs. And then at that time we were told, but the GDP is increasing. So today we are being told by the same party that no, GDP is not important, it's jobs which is important.
No, but let's look at that broad issue, Kanchan.
No, 1 second, Rahul.
Yes.
I mean, let's also get real about it. World over, jobs are shrinking. There's no percentage in comparing our job market with that of Germany or Denmark or some European country and say, see, they have got so many jobs and we don't. Our job market is huge, and we need way more jobs. Now, so obviously the question is where they're going to come from. I think we have to get real and start looking at options of employment. That is, I mean, what all you can do to earn a livelihood. There won't be jobs, and I know it's politically incorrect to say this, but the realistic position, and if Indian political parties, especially in the opposition, were to be honest, they would all come together and say that let's put our heads together, let's look at alternative modes of employment, let's look at not jobs creation in terms of 10 to 5 jobs, but jobs where there is a decent livelihood, and that would be the way forward. Not say that we need more factories. Of course, we need more factories, but large factories, as you see in China, for instance, they are not going to happen over here because of your labor laws, because of your land laws.
That's a very important point, and I want to put that to Praveen Chakravarti, that you need factor market
last
reforms.
Point, Rahul.
Yes.
Now, unless you sort of, you can't be a functioning democracy, a constitutional democracy, and say that I will just let the factory owner hire and fire at will, or I will not look at the labor conditions over there, or I will not look at the overall welfare conditions over there. There were riots in Bangalore. In Karnataka, there were riots in Tamil Nadu. And over job conditions, over salaries not being paid on time. Now, can you imagine something similar happening in China? So, we should get real. We should get, and this is something where you need bipartisan thinking, that there will not be sufficient 10 to 5 jobs with 90 days of paid holiday a year. assured pension at the end of your service. It's not going to happen. And if it's not going to happen, or if it's not going to happen in a grand scale, what are the alternative modes of employment that can be looked at,
Okay.
that can be worked upon?
Okay, so now, Praveen Chakravarti, to be able to create the kind of manufacturing that you spoke about, you need factor market reform. You need reform in land, labor, energy, access to credit. Ridhan Desai also spoke about farm reforms. Now the question is, will the opposition and the Congress party be willing to back, Kanchan Gupta speaking about the need for bipartisan support. Would you be willing to back the government if it were to make those kind of reform pitches? Because when they do, typically from the opposition, we've seen an effort to obstruct. Very rarely do we see any constructive engagement, which is why parliamentary proceedings have been held up for a long time. And that also is part of the problem. You want that manufacturing, then manufacturing won't come as is, because India's cost structure is such that it simply isn't competitive. Unless we change that by reforming factor market production, unless we do factor market reforms, we're not going to be able to achieve that. And that's where the opposition gets obstructionist.
Yeah, Rahul, we are discussing serious economic matters. I would request you to leave your politics behind and not judge whether opposition behavior is obstructionist or constructive.
Okay.
So leave that behind. Let us talk about what are the reforms required. Okay. So I was the one who actually used the word bipartisan consensus first. I was the one who said jobs is an emergency. Let's all come together, treat this as a COVID emergency. Let us put our brains together. I will also agree and accept that the definition of a job, the traditional definition of a job is changing. I'm the first to accept that gig work is the new norm, and as India is already experiencing it. Now, talking about factor market reforms. Okay, I have heard this factor market reforms from the Lal Street economists and Wall Street economists for the last 20 years. And somebody talked about Tamil Nadu. Let me give you a simple example. What in economic terms would be called a natural experiment. State of Tamil Nadu accounts for 40% of all of electronics manufacturing, has more factories than the rest of the country combined. It is by far India's workshop manufacturing factories. Guess what? Tamil Nadu has the most stringent labor laws. Tamil Nadu's non-agricultural labor wages are the highest, 40% higher than even Maharashtra. Tamil Nadu does not have hire and fire. Tamil Nadu has social justice at its core. So let us be practical. Let us accept that just because some economic theory is spouted by some economists, market economists, that is the evidence is very, very clear. When Tamil Nadu as a state can do it, what I'm saying is we must come together, not quibble over, okay, what type of job, whether...
So what kind of reforms do you think are required? What are the kind of reforms that will be acceptable to the Congress party?
If there are practical solutions for jobs, we are absolutely in agreement to come for a bipartisan consensus on it.
No, but what are the kind of reforms that are acceptable to your party?
Rahul, can I just come in for a second?
Just 1 second. He's saying that there must be economic reform.
No,
I'm trying to
understand.
I
just want to point out to Praveen why we need bipartisan. I agree, he only made that point. And it's commonsensical that without having bipartisan support, things won't move in this country. Now, for instance, there was this huge alumina mine which was supposed to happen in Odisha, which would have employed thousands of people, and the trickle-down benefits of that, the downstream benefits of that would have been huge. It would have elevated Paradip port, but it didn't happen. It didn't happen because the Congress hit the ground, protested against the planned mine, and ensured that it did not happen. Why is it that India's largest steel plant was not allowed to come up in Odisha? It would have employed thousands of people, and there would have been downstream benefits. Why is it that the Singur plant was not allowed to happen? So it's very nice to sit in a television studio and talk about bipartisan support for good things which should happen. But when they start happening, people just jump down your throat, and the whole thing is, karke dekho, we'll see how you do it. So that attitude, I think, needs to be...
Let Praveen Chakravarti respond, because a lot of this is stuff that the UPA wanted to do, could never find the political means to do it. Now when the BJP does it, you try and scuttle it.
No, okay, let me respond to this. See, now we can keep happened in the past and what happened then and what happened this. Here is a simple point that I am making. We are putting a pen to where our mouth is, which is there is a point in the manifesto, hold us to account, which says we want to double share of mining to 4% of GDP, but strategic mining for strategic minerals. We are saying that. I agree. If my colleague wants to term it as a mea culpa, you can term it whatever. But I don't want to look behind. I don't want to look at the past. I am talking about what are practical solutions, which is why I brought up mining. And I said, yeah, it is there in the manifesto. So we can argue about what happened in UPA, what happened during Mrs. Gandhi's time and all of that. But that's not very constructive at this stage. Let us move forward. We have put that very categorically, and we will support it.
Okay, so I want to go back to Rhythm as we come towards the tail end of this broadcast. Rhythm Desai, let's discuss some of the ideas that have been thrown about here. One, the need for an apprenticeship program. Praveen Chakravarti from the Congress arguing that this would upskill people, make them ready for the job market, and somehow create jobs, and that they'd get employment. Do you see this as potentially being one of the possible solutions to what he calls a job emergency? Do you accept that there is a jobs emergency at the moment?
Actually, jobs are a lagging indicator of economic performance. They get created from growth, not the other way around. So when you lift growth, you create jobs. Because as I think you pointed out very rightly, companies need to invest, and investments create jobs. Companies invest when they are confident about future growth. Therefore, you have to work towards getting growth higher. And we have got a little disrupted. We should not forget that it was only 24 months ago that we were in the grip of COVID. Confidence levels were low. People didn't know what was going to happen. And we've just walked out of that, and confidence is coming back now. And I am very sure that an investment cycle is underway. And this jobs debate will be rested in the next 3 years. Jobs come with a lag. They did so in every growth cycle. Even in the 03-07 cycle, jobs came with a bit of lag. No growth cycle starts with full employment. When you hit full employment, that's the peak of that cycle. So there will always be a gap, and it will get filled as growth accelerates and growth starts doing well over the long run.
Very important.
So the bottom line is we need to sustain our growth rate. And the last 5 years has not been a good example of that, and largely because of COVID. And now we are coming to that period where we're going to sustain 6.5, 7. And I'm hoping that this gets pushed into the 7s and then the 6s. And then you will see that no longer will we be debating jobs.
Rahul, just addition on the job front. Unlike the manifesto that didn't win, the fact is that the interim budget speech of the finance minister, and the more you read into it, is providing a very clear-cut sort of roadmap for the future. On the job front alone, just one scheme had promised to generate 55 lakh employment opportunities. I remember another scheme for 1 lakh crore corpus for tech-savvy youth. Frankly, I think in the campaigning that you covered so intensively, this message got sidelined, but all the answers that people are now discussing and seeking were present in the interim budget.
And they need to be acted on.
They need to be acted on, and so I think even if half of this is done, including the 11.1% hike in infrastructure spending, even if our economy is able to absorb a portion of that, because there are just a few months now, 9 months left practically in this financial year, you will see a lot of growth and therefore consequently job creation.
The other thing, Rhythm Desai, that Praveen Chakravarti spoke of was him citing the example of Tamil Nadu, which has strict labor laws, and arguing that it's not as if you need factor market reforms on land, labor, energy, credit to be able to attract investment into manufacturing, that there are other ways in which this can be done. And I don't know whether he called you a Dalal Street economist, not just you, but I'm saying the whole tribe, whether it's a Dalal Street economist or a Wall Street economist, but all of them have it wrong. These don't matter. We can create manufacturing capacity, bring people into these sectors which are labor intensive, even if we don't do these kind of politically tough reform measures.
You see, Rahul, the problem with that is simple. You could argue that India has not needed a government with a majority mandate, because in the last 25, 30 years, we have grown at an average of 6%. But that's the problem with part-dependent variables, right? We don't know what could have been had India put in stronger governments.
Correct.
So that's the problem. We don't know what India can be if we have, we have more liberal land and labor laws. And maybe what we've achieved so far, will pale when we do that. So I think that's the problem with part-dependent variables.
Well, that's a very important point, that you don't know how much better you would have been if you'd actually been able to make it easier for companies to invest than the kind of environment they face at the moment. Kanchan Gupta, since you have such a deep understanding of how this government functions and thinks, your sense of the absence of a full majority for the BJP and the impact this can have on the reform agenda the government and the Prime Minister would have ideally liked to pursue?
No, I think, you see, the Prime Minister will still push ahead with what he believes are the priorities of his government. And a big space in that list of priorities would comprise social infrastructure, because he does believe that unless you are offering people a roof on their head, over their head, unless you are offering people toilets, unless you are offering them basic health guarantees, and unless you have public health measures like piped potable water in every home, you cannot think in terms of motivating people into working for a higher wage, or working in different ways to earn a livelihood. But more importantly, I think the Prime Minister has stood firm that this whole, and no offense is intended, but this whole thing, ki vote for me and you will get takatak 1,000 rupees in your account, or vote for me because I am giving you 1,200 rupees or 1,000 rupees. I mean, it's very sad. I mean, are we dumbing down the aspirations of our people to a level, and I got to see it in West Bengal, where I come from, that people are now happy, or at least the women are now happy, that they are getting 1,200 rupees if they are SC/ST, or 1,000 rupees if they are non-SC/ST per month in their account. So is that all you aspire for, those 1,000 rupees?
No, my baap sarkar. Praveen Chakravarti, I'm out of time, so let's have a final
and lastly, and just 5 seconds.
Yeah.
I mean, this whole dole culture, again, you need a bipartisan look at it, that these are the red lines. This is where welfareism ends, and this is where dole begins.
Okay.
And let everybody come on board, and I think that by itself would change the atmosphere.
Final words, Praveen Chakravarti. Business Today did a
Yeah.
story where we calculated how much the outgo could be. It's almost 1/4 of the total budget estimate for revenue for this year. So if 1/4 is spent because taka tak, you're giving money into people's bank account, it's the surest way for the country to end up with a lot of public debt.
Rahul, I just detailed out a long list of ideas for job creation. I actually have not heard a single concrete idea from anybody else yet. So while you can keep talking about taka or whatever the welfare is, I've just detailed out a long list of ideas. We can debate whether they're good, bad, all of that. But let's talk about real ideas. The second important thing that does not come up, which I really
You keep dodging this question, which makes me wonder whether you agree with the idea of taka not, or given your background, you yourself don't seem convinced about it, which is why this is the third time you dodged the question. If 1/4 of the total revenue estimate, you keep saying this, but you're not answering the question. If 1/4 of the total revenue estimate of this fiscal gets spent on taka, give you money sitting at home, do you think that's a good idea? Is that the right way to run the country?
Let us talk about what is needed. Like I said, the biggest issue facing the country is jobs emergency, and we have a few ideas. We must focus on growth, absolutely. If you focus on growth, first of all, tax to GDP has to go up. That is how you get more revenues. Your growth has to be high. You have to have tax buoyancy. But there is one important thing I want to point out economically, because finally we actually do have a coalition government, which is great for India's federalism. The federalism charade has to stop. The cess mess, where 1/5 of the tax revenues is through cesses, that goes only to the union government, and the states were deprived, will have to stop. Again, I will point out, in our manifesto, we said that we will limit cesses to 5% of overall gross tax revenues. So these are things in the manifesto. Some people, many of you choose not to see it, but this is something that a coalition-run Modi 3.0, I am sure, will definitely consider or will be forced to consider.
Okay, I'm out of time. We've had a high-quality discussion. We may not have been able to come to any consensus on what needs to be done next, but at least we saw a sharp articulation of ideas, and that's really what democracy is all about. You hear contesting ideas, you try and come to a bipartisan consensus. A lot of that will be required. A lot of changing will be required in the government style of functioning. We'll see whether the opposition also changes its style of obstruction a bit or not. But fascinating days ahead. For the time being, Ridham Desai for joining us with your sharp thoughts. Thank you very much. Praveen Chakravarti for countering them. And Kanchan Gupta, I'm delighted that you're back on television. We've been missing you. So we hope to have a lot more of you in the days to come and share your insights with our viewers. Siddharth, thanks as always.
Big story coming in here on India Today. Delhi's Lieutenant Governor Vinay Kumar Saxena has granted sanction for prosecution of author Arundhati Roy under the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, or UAPA. This is a strong anti-terror law. This sanction for prosecution is for alleged provocative speech made in 2010. A former professor of international law in the Central University of Kashmir also faces prosecution under the same law. The Delhi police had registered a case in 2010 on the directions, we are told, of the Metropolitan Magistrate for an alleged offensive speech of promoting enmity between different groups on grounds of religion, race, birth, and for actions prejudicial to national integration. That's the information that's coming in. The police had accused author Arundhati Roy for actions related to public mischief. Kashmiri Pandit activists, Kashmiri Hindu activists had filed a complaint against the accused in Delhi's Tilakmarg police station against the organizers of a rally under the banner Azadi, the Only War. The complainants had alleged that the speakers had advocated separation of Jammu and Kashmir from the rest of the country. I quickly want to cut across to India Today's Amit Bharadwaj for more on this. Amit, sanction for prosecution has come only now, but the case on the directions of Metropolitan Magistrate was registered in 2010. How is Raj Bhavan explaining the delay from 2010 to 2024?
Gaurav, you know what happens in many of the cases like this one that especially deals with charges such as sedition or UAPA. Normally the LG office, tries to delay the entire process and that's what has happened in this case particularly as well, because Arundhati Roy is, not only author but also activist, internationally known. So possibly the LG's office did take almost more than a decade's time in this particular case, but now the sanction has been given to prosecute Arundhati Roy and Shaukat Hussain in this particular case under the sections of UAPA. Now this, definitely means that Arundhati Roy will be facing charges against this stringent law, which generally deals with even activities related to terror or rather terror charges. What is to be noted out here, Gaurav, is that what has attracted this particular charges or registration of FIR under the UAPA. Arundhati Roy was speaking at the event Azadi, the Only Way, back in 2010, and there are video footages in which she can be heard saying that a lot of times media personnel ask me this question as to whether does she consider Kashmir as integral part of India or not, which she herself says in the video that Kashmir was never an integral part of India, and you cannot change that fact. So these are the statements made by Arundhati Roy, which has attracted the prosecution under UAPA. Now we have to see as to how Delhi police further proceeds in this particular case. And UAPA also means, Gaurav, that the arrest is something which cannot be denied in this particular case, because the law, you also know, is that very stringent, very strict in when it is filed under UAPA. So in this particular case, Arundhati Roy is definitely facing arrest, possibilities of arrest, and we'll have to see as to whether she also approaches the court for interim relief.
So Arundhati Roy was actually quoted saying, or she's on camera saying, that Jammu and Kashmir is not an integral part of India, according to Delhi police?
Yes, Gaurav, there are video footage as well in the archives of YouTube. If you go through it, there are several cameras, several news channels present at the event, and this entire event was videographed. In fact, the Kashmiri Pandit activists who had actually tried to disrupt the event, to launch their protest, Delhi police had intervened in that particular event to ensure that the law and order situation remains under control. And then she also had gone on to say that, when I'm speaking about Kashmir, I'm also speaking for justice for everyone, even for Kashmiri Pandits. They have been wrong. But the fact remains that in this particular, conference, she had made certain statements which has now attracted, charges under UAPA.
Okay, keep tracking that story. I will come back to you for more. Amit Bharadwaj, for the moment, many thanks for joining me. Shifting focus to the other big story we're tracking here on India Today. It's the Sandalwood murder story, and that continues to unravel. Now, in a fresh twist, a video has now emerged that shows the victim, Renuka Swamy, being abducted. Several Kannada film stars and filmmakers have now spoken out against actor Darshan, calling this entire case a blot on the Kannada film industry. We get you more in this report.
One of the main accused in the Renuka Swamy murder, Raghavendra, was taken by the police to the crime spot to recreate the incident. Raghavendra, allegedly at the behest of Sandalwood superstar, took Renuka Swamy from Chitradurga in an auto, and then they travelled in a rented Etios car to Bengaluru. They were spotted in the CCTV footage at the toll plaza of Chitradurga. The star's lawyer has questioned his involvement in the case.
Darshan's car was seen in the CCTV footage going into the shed where the Renuka Swamy was allegedly assaulted and killed. What about that CCTV footage?
No. Yeah, that the CCTV footage, we doesn't know. Actually, they're showing us in the Darshan car. Even till it is not yet confirmed. Actually, that car which belongs to maybe belongs to the Darshan. Actually, but he was not at all present at the inside the car or on the spot also.
He's not only a star but a superstar who rules the box office of Kannada film world with immense money and political clout. But days after arrest, the situation is changing fast.
I spoke to the Q people. They said that due to media was always there in the police station, so they wanted to work very freely. That is why they have covered the police station. That's all. No, anyone can. If you have any complaint, you better go and try.
4 days after Darshan was arrested, Sandalwood started to speak up against the superstar.
So I don't think, just because you see 20, 30 people standing outside the police station and things like that, it doesn't mean he has the kind of clout that, yes, they're notorious. They're like literally rowdy elements, so you can call them that. So maybe that's why they grab everyone's attention. But I don't think he has the kind of clout that people are talking about. If that was the case, like I just told you, then it would be a different scenario. And there are other actors in the industry who have much, like many, many more fans. And yes, in the past he did have, like for example, I think he's got away so many times.
Filmmakers working with him on upcoming projects are in tight spot at the moment. The much-anticipated Darshan starrer Devil by Milana Prakash was supposed to hit the screens in December this year. It has come to a standstill. Darshan's untitled projects in the pipeline include a film on freedom fighter Sindhura Lakshmana's life. All of them have been stalled indefinitely. Bureau Report, India Today.
We will continue to track developments on the story very closely, but that is all we have time for on this special broadcast. Many thanks for watching. News and updates continue on India Today. Stay with us.